Hello, I'm Noah Bradley, and today we're going to be talking about how to make card art, art for card games. I've been doing this for nearly a decade now and have done literally hundreds of images for card games. So this is something I know a decent bit about, and I want to help you make better work so that you can get a good card art portfolio. There's some unique challenges that have to do with making art for cards because they get printed this tiny. So we're going to try to cover some of that stuff and how you can make your own work a lot better and a lot stronger so you can have a really, really solid portfolio of card art. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. So the way I start every illustration for card art is always with thumbnails. And these tend to look pretty bad. They're not going to be very pretty images, and obviously right here you're going to see me doing very quickly. This whole video is sped up, I believe 6x, so it's a fair bit faster than reality, but still these things do not take me very long. They are really just kind of scribbles for me to get some thoughts down, and they are never meant to be shown to anyone. You guys are just getting to see them because I want to show the whole process. But for me, this is mostly just kind of thinking about the sort of elements I want in the piece and just generally thinking, like, how do I want to place them on the canvas? What kind of background stuff do I want going on? And I don't even necessarily take these as a literal translation into my sketches. Sometimes I'll just be getting ideas out, and then as I'm sketching, a lot of the stuff with the composition is going to change. But for me, that thumbnailing stage, even though it's a really quick part of the process, is a very important one. And now you can see me starting to get into some actual sketching. So after I've done a number of thumbnails, I try to do at least 9, but sometimes I go way higher than that, kind of depending on how much time I have to put into the piece, as well as some compositions are just more of a struggle than others. So you'll find that you'll need to do some more for certain pieces and less for others. Some pieces just come together really quickly and it seems really easy and everything goes naturally. Other pieces are a constant struggle that you just need to keep working on. So when I'm sketching here, you'll see I sketch in full color. I don't bother with even doing a line sketch first, and that's just how it tends to work for me. I do occasionally do some line sketches, but for me the easiest way to get to a good sketch that I'll send in to a client is actually just diving in with full color and brushes and starting to block in big shapes. This is the sort of stuff that I will send to a client. So I'm going to do 2 sketches here, and these are sort of the level that I would comfortably be able to show an art director. They're enough to kind of get the point across, but I'm not getting into getting reference yet. I'm not getting really, really involved in anatomy and correct proportions and all that stuff. I'm just kind of establishing the general idea of this piece, and with the assumption that obviously I would fix everything that's wrong with it whenever I do take the piece to final. But these sketches are just to kind of get the idea of the general color, the general composition, the lighting, the sort of elements that are going to go into this piece. So that was the first sketch. And in general, I try to spend somewhere around maybe 30 minutes to an hour on these sketches. That's just kind of how I've found that I work. I'm not actually setting a time limit for myself when I do that. That's just kind of how long it takes for me to get the idea across without really getting into rendering. If I go much further than that hour, I find that I'm just kind of adding details rather than really conveying much new information. And that's not really the point of a sketch. The point of a sketch is just to get across the overall idea. You can always render later on. You can always finish something later. So this is just about communicating. And so here I'm doing the second sketch, and this is the one I end up finishing. Not because it's necessarily better or worse. It's just the one that I felt conveyed the mood that I wanted to go for this piece a little bit better. It had a little bit more drama, a little more impact. The other one just kind of had the normal lighting scheme, whereas I really liked doing this sort of sunrise, sunset look. it's just a really nice way to get some really flattering colors, some really punchy contrast. There's just a lot of fun stuff with sunsets and sunrises. They're always a go-to for me. So I talk a lot of this stuff in the written tutorial that goes with this video, but I just wanted to talk about it on this video for anyone who might be just watching this and not reading the ImagineFX tutorial that goes with it. But I talk a lot about values and a lot about clear, simple shapes. And that is what card art is all about. This is the kind of unique defining characteristic of card art, is that it is seen so tiny that everything needs to be painfully obvious. Everything needs to be really clear, really obvious, easy to read immediately. There is no room for really subtle, strange things that are hard to read. Once in a blue moon you can get away with that because maybe a certain card calls for a little bit more abstraction and calls for a little more confusion, but that is definitely a rarity. By and large, you're going to want card art that is extremely easy to read and has a lot of punch and impact to it. A lot of art can look really nice when you see it up close and in large-scale prints and stuff, but as soon as you shrink it down to just a couple inches wide, you're going to lose a lot of stuff. All the detail just goes out the window. So much of the subtlety of color and value and nice little edges just suddenly disappears, and you're left with just kind of the overall impact of the image. And if that part is not strong enough, you're going to be left with kind of an underwhelming image. So I will just be always harping on just how important values and clear shapes are. They're two of the biggest, most important things for doing good card art, and it's something that I see so many people screw up on. I see a lot of portfolios that people hand to me, and they'll have some good paintings, some good fundamentals, but they'll just be missing out on the clarity that you need in good card art. So you'll see people that, will have done a lot of book covers, say, and a lot of their stuff can be very good and very punchy. Book covers often benefit from having really clear values and clear shapes, but they won't go quite as far as card art requires, and so their portfolio just won't be quite fitting for what a card art company would be looking for. So when you take a look at your own portfolio, for instance, you should try taking a look at just the thumbnail versions of all your images. Try shrinking down your entire portfolio to really tiny and see how it reads then. And if it's clear what's happening, it's clear the action, it's clear everything that's going on in that image, then you're probably on the right track. Another thing I like to do, and you don't see it too often in the video, but it does happen sort of either when the video cuts out or way too fast for the capture to record it. But I will actually switch the entire thing to grayscale briefly to really check those values and make sure they're in the right place. And make sure that, if you ignore all of the color stuff going on, that the image is still really strong. And that's something I also see a lot of people mess up on. They get too wrapped up in color and forget all about the value structure of their image. So go ahead and switch to grayscale pretty frequently. A nice way to do that in Photoshop is with the color proofing settings. So the default shortcut on Windows is Control-Y for that. And that will switch it to a proofing mode. And usually the default proofing mode is CMYK for some reason. But you can actually switch that custom standard default one to grayscale, which means you can just press Control-Y and it will actually preview the entire image in grayscale. And the great thing is that if you actually want to keep painting, the color picker will still actually pick colors and will lay down colors even when you're in that proofing mode. So it can be kind of fun to work in that sort of pseudo grayscale occasionally, just to make sure everything is really strong. It's all about these strong shapes, these strong values. One exercise you might try doing is take some old master paintings. I'm a big fan of master studies. So take some old paintings of masters and try reducing them to really simple value shapes. Break them down to very fundamental things, and you'll find that for the most part, even when you break it down to very simple shapes and just a few values, that their images are still very clear and easily read. Obviously not the case with all of them. There are some monumental paintings that are 20 feet wide, and those don't work quite as well when you break them down that much. But a lot of good stuff out there that you can find. I also encourage you to look at Golden Age illustrators. People like Howard Pyle, N.C. Wyeth, Mead Schaefer, all of that sort of crowd are fantastic at this stuff. They really defined just how good illustration can look. And they were all about these clear, simple shapes and clear silhouettes. And so that'd be some great stuff to look at if this is something that you're interested in and want to study more of. I think master studies, as I've said so many times before in so many places, are one of the best ways to train your eye. And so I encourage you to find some good masters that do a lot of illustration work and go ahead and study them. You can also study some modern people too. If you look at the card art from your favorite game, whatever that is, and break down those images, see why the really successful ones are so successful, and maybe even look at some of the ones that are less successful and find out why that is. Why can you not understand what this image is? Because when it's so tiny, maybe all of that detail and stuff gets lost, and you're looking at all sorts of strange creatures and stuff like that, and then the image doesn't make any more sense. So go ahead and look at all that stuff, compare, analyze, treat this as kind of like an academic subject. You're not just drawing pretty pictures here. Really put some thought into this stuff and figure out what works and what doesn't about this stuff. So just some thoughts for how you can refine those skills so that you're making sure that your own images have these really strong, really clear values and really clear shapes and silhouettes. Now, when I talk about clear silhouettes, that's something I'd like to address in particular. And what I mean by that is that when you've got a figure, say, and the figure is doing something, if you were to reduce that entire figure to one value, to just a single dark value, would you be able to tell what that figure is doing? And if the answer is no, you're kind of setting yourself up for trouble there. Because we often read silhouettes before we read the interior details of something. So we're going to look at that silhouette to first figure out what is happening. And if that's not immediately obvious, it's not going to really lend itself to being the punchiest image that it can be. So in general, when you've got a figure, you want to make sure that that silhouette is telling the whole story. You want to make sure that if the figure has, say, a sword that's really, really important, that you can see, for instance, the hilt of the sword or the tip of the sword silhouetted against something behind it. And this isn't hard and fast rule, but in general, you want to make sure that that silhouette is conveying something. If the hands are really, really important, think about what sort of shapes those hands are making. Don't just think about, this is practically what would happen. Think about visually in terms of abstract shapes. How clear is it? What's going on in this image just from silhouette alone? And you'll find that once you've got that established, it's much easier during this painting and rendering process to have a clear, readable image just sort of naturally happen because you've already got that strong foundation that you're working on top of. Now, another thing I really want to talk about, you might have noticed it happening in the video, it's happening right now and it's happened before with the figure, is reference images. And this is really, 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 really important. It is the single most common piece of advice I give for portfolio reviews, and that is to use more reference. You need to use more reference. Even if you're using some reference, you probably need to be using more reference. This is just everyone's problem. Everyone slacks off, doesn't use reference, doesn't even bother getting the reference, or if they did get it, they're not using it. Everyone struggles with this. They try to make stuff up when they should not be making stuff up. They try to use their imagination when they should be using reference so that they can make the best image they can. And this is a problem, and there's all sorts of roots to this problem, whether it's art school or bad teachers or your peers. Someone has told you maybe at some point that it's cheating to copy from photos, therefore you should somehow magically be able to paint everything from imagination the first time without trying. And this is all just absolute nonsense. You need to be using reference. We need to base our work on something. We need to have something to pull from so that our work isn't entirely done from imagination. Because how do we get stuff into our brain so that we know how to paint it? We look at it. And so you need to be getting good reference. I would say that by far the vast majority of the best illustrators out there are using tremendous amounts of really good reference. Whether they're shooting it themselves or whether they're finding it online, whatever they're doing, whether they're compiling a bunch of different images, whether they're finding just the ideal image, whatever it happens to be, they're getting good reference. And it's going to help for everything. It's going to help for environments. It's going to help for color schemes. It's going to help for different textures and materials. It's going to help, obviously, for figures and anatomy. There's so much stuff that is just really, really hard to make up, and you quite simply just don't have to make it up. You can get good reference. Now, this is where I get to do a shameless plug for our own project. Me and my wife run a project we call Reference Pictures. The URL is just reference.pictures. No .com, nothing like that, just reference.pictures. And we wanted to just make a little project where for just a few bucks you can download some really high quality reference of costumed figures. And we've also done some anatomy packs, so we've done some facial expressions, we've done some hands, and we just wanted to make it really clearly available, easily available for even students to afford to buy really high quality photographic reference. Because the sort of stuff you can find on Google, while it can be good, it's really hit or miss. There's a lot of problems. You come up with bad lighting, you come up with bad cameras, you come up with just the wrong reference, not enough poses, not the right sort of stuff that we as artists are looking for. So that's kind of why we started this project. And actually the reference image you see here that I'm using for this piece is from one of our collections. So you kind of see just how much information I'm getting from this image. There's so much nice stuff that I would just never have been able to make up. Getting that, you know, backlight glow through the dress is really hard to make up. But when you've already got it there in the reference, it's super easy to observe and to paint that. Same goes for the face, which obviously right now looks pretty terrible, but I swear eventually it will get fixed. So there's just so much information that you get from even pretty good reference that would just be so hard to make up that it always makes sense to do this stuff. And even the landscape shot you saw there was part of one of our free packs from Norway. Actually, sorry, that pack actually does cost a few bucks, but we have 20 gigs worth of absolutely free, pay $0 reference of landscapes. So there's tremendous amounts of landscape reference on there, as well as all this figure stuff. So, and you're obviously welcome to use it for all free commercial projects, whatever it is. When you buy it, it's all yours. And for the free stuff, it's all just completely free. People have used it on games and movies, on all sorts of different projects. It's all over tons of illustration work, and I highly recommend checking it out. Even just grab the free packs, you'll get all the landscape reference you probably ever need. And then once you start using this reference in your work, you're going to be shocked at just how much improvement you see. It's the easiest way to drastically improve your pieces. Just for the next piece you do, just double or triple the amount of reference you're using. If you don't use any reference at all, just suddenly use some reference and you will be shocked at the improvement you make. So I know I'm going on a lot about this, but I swear it's just really, really important. I cannot stress enough just how important this stuff is. And the thing is also, it doesn't even have to be good reference. So obviously with our project, we're shooting this stuff so that it is really, really good reference. We're lighting things well, we're getting good costumes, we're posing things well, we're making sure everything's kind of in the right place. You don't have to work as hard in the painting stage. But that said, even bad reference is still good. For many, many years, Most of my reference was setting up either a camera or even just my phone propped up on my desk or something, setting a timer on it, running to the other side of the room, striking a pose, and boom, there's my reference. And yeah, they were pretty bad, and I had to do it, 20 times back and forth, running across the room. I've got all sorts of awkward things, holding, pillows and stuff like that as my props. It works. It's not ideal, but even that sort of level of reference is better than nothing. It's infinitely better than nothing. And it's going to give you so much information that you would just struggle to be able to make up without anything to go on. So go ahead and get reference, however you want to do that, whether you want to download stuff online or whether you want to shoot your own, whatever it happens to be, just make sure that for your next piece, whatever that is, that you get a lot of reference for everything in it. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is the background, or as I prefer to call it, usually the environment. Too many people think of backgrounds for characters as a second consideration. They don't really think it's an essential part of doing a good character piece. And I get why, because if you like painting characters, you're going to enjoy painting the character. The rest of a piece is not going to hold quite as much interest for you. It's going to be the stuff you have to do because your client didn't want a blank background behind your character. But environments are absolutely crucial to a really, really good character piece because they place that character into a world. And that's a really important, powerful thing. And it's not something that you should be neglecting, even if you want to be known as a really great character artist. Because the ability to be able to place one of those characters into a believable, interesting environment is going to set you up to be even more recognizable as a character artist. It's going to be a unique skill, a unique strength that you're going to have over other people. I think it's a very, very important thing, and it's very important not only because I really like them, but also because it really stands out if you don't do it. If you slack off on the environment and you do a really nice character, everyone's going to notice. Everyone's going to look at your really, really awful environment and are going to be distracted from the awesome character that you just painted. So usually what I tell people is they have to render up an environment so that nobody really wants to look at the unimportant parts. That's what I try to do. Even when I do a straight up environment piece with no character in it, I'm still trying to render up the uninteresting parts just enough so that nobody actually looks there. Usually your eye is going to track and find something that is clearly unfinished and is going to look at it. And you don't want people to do that. You want them to ignore those boring parts so that they look at the cool parts. So you want to paint an environment such that, sure, if people look at it, they'll really enjoy it, but you also want to paint an environment so that the attention is drawn to that awesome character that you painted. So always keep that in mind. Every decision we're making about the environment in a piece like this is all about lending importance to that character. So we're making sure that they're the most obviously important part about this piece, that the values and the shapes are all leading to them being an interesting, clear thing. So that's something to think about as you're working on this stuff, and to not neglect that environment. Obviously, I'm speaking as an environment artist. I really like doing environment pieces. It's what my career has been built on for years now. So obviously I'm a little bit biased towards them, but they are really, 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 really important. Go ahead and look at some great character work, and you will notice that oftentimes they are able to pull off a very good environment for those characters. Now, related to the environment, and going back to what I'm talking about originally about strong values and clear shapes, is that oftentimes an environment is going to have to be very, very subtle. You'll notice that the value range for the entire background here is very, very tight. If you were to convert all that to grayscale, the value differences back there are extremely subtle. Most of the differences there are happening more with color than with value. And the reason for that is that I want that figure in the foreground to definitely stand out. I want it to be very obvious that their silhouette is right there. And it's just punchy and strong, even when it's really, really zoomed out. So always be thinking about that stuff. You can see there I popped a little bit more contrast into the image just to get a few more darks there. I found that I was getting a little too washed out with some stuff. So bringing in some more darks, but also reducing some of the contrast in certain areas of the piece. That's something I find that I have to do quite often, is actually reduce the amount of detail and contrast that I get into my images. I'll often find that I'll zoom into a part of the environment and be rendering and sketching and adding all these details and nice values and colors, and then I'll zoom out and it will look absolutely terrible. I'll have gone way, way too far. I'll have way too much contrast, way too much detail. It just sticks out like a sore thumb. So I'll take a really gentle airbrush and actually brush back some of that detail, brush back some of the contrast, and reduce everything back there. One thing I like to do for getting the glow as well as getting some more atmosphere is occasionally correcting myself by using a lighten layer. So I'll pop a new layer in Photoshop, set it to the lighten blending mode, and then just take a gentle airbrush and just brush in some nice saturated colors into those shadows. And so it won't destroy all the nice lights you've got, but it'll bring a little bit more vibrance into your shadows, as well as knock back some of the contrast that's happening there. I find that's something I have to do pretty frequently, is correcting my values and always making sure those are on track. It's part of the struggle of zooming into a piece, is that you also really need to make sure that you're zooming out of the piece. So something I'll do occasionally is make an entire new window in Photoshop for the piece and have it stayed there zoomed out the entire time. That can be a really nice way to get that overall look. You can also use the navigator window and keep that enabled, and that'll give you a nice thumbnail preview of your image, which can be kind of handy to always keep there. As well as, once again, to always go back to that grayscale checking. This is something that I think would benefit a whole lot of people, because honestly, as much as I love color, the cornerstone of really good color work is phenomenal value work. If you get those values really, really, really strong, it kind of doesn't matter quite as much what you're doing with the saturation or with the hue. Those are kind of secondary considerations after the values, because once you've got those values established, you can really go pretty crazy with the colors. This piece has a lot of different colors in it, a lot of different color contrast, warm and cool stuff happening. And the reason all of that stuff holds together is that the value structure of this piece is very simple and very solid. You've got a dark foreground and a light background, and that's kind of all that's happening there. There's a lot of subtleties happening throughout that, but by and large it's a very simple value structure. And so that lets me get away with all the sorts of crazy colors I wanted to add to this piece. Also, now that I'm doing that glow a little bit more on her dress, you can see how much tight value control is essential for getting lighting effects like that. Because if I had gone too contrasty everywhere in those shadows in that foreground character, I wouldn't have been able to pop out these inner glows. Getting those glows is all about really, really nice value control. Values are not all about, let's see how contrasty I can get it. It's really more about placing those correct values, which often means that you have to go really subtle with them. Subtlety is a very, very powerful tool when it comes to managing your values. Now, there's another thing I want to address about card art in particular, and I think this is one that people get a strange misconception about. And that is that because your image is being shrunk down so much, a lot of the detail gets lost. A lot of things that might look great and interesting and detailed when you're seeing them up close suddenly disappear when you're doing card art. And now a lot of people use this as sort of an excuse to not render, to not figure things out, to not finish a piece to a reasonable level of completion. Knowing that obviously it's being reproduced at 2 inches wide, and you're not going to see a lot of the stuff that you spend time on detailing.
And I don't think this is a very good approach in general for people to take. I think it's worthwhile to spend that extra time and get something that looks really interesting, even at a larger scale. Now, some people will obviously disagree with that, and that's fine. But my personal take is that card art is not an excuse to be lazy on your work. And I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, is people are just too lazy to refine their images to make something that looks interesting up close. And now I've done this for a long time, and obviously I sell a lot of prints in my work too, and I want to take pride in making sure that those prints look really, really nice. So ideally, I want, an image that is going to look fantastic on even an A1 print, a really big print, as well as really iconic and striking and punchy on a card. So I want something that serves all of those purposes at the same time. And obviously that's a bit of a challenge, but that's what I think is so great about card art, is that it does encourage you to take on that challenge. It encourages you to make an image that is so adaptable. And I think that's something that you can really take from doing card art and improve your skills with. It gives you a lot of range and flexibility. And I think makes for really interesting images, even if you are doing something that's not card art. So nowadays, if you were to say do some book cover illustration or some commercial advertising illustration, something like that, but you take all the principles that you've learned from doing card art, all the principles of making an image that reads even at 2 inches wide. If you take all that stuff and apply it to a larger reproduction, you're just going to have a stronger image. You're going to have a movie poster that reads extremely clearly from all the way across the room. And that's what you want. You want that instant striking punch to the face kind of impact. That's what card art is going to teach you. So I think that's something that I would encourage you to do, is that even as you're approaching this as card art, to also make sure that you're refining your images enough so that when they are seen large, and so often they are, that they're really something that you can take a lot of pride in and that you really enjoy and that people would even want to hang prints of. I think that's kind of the goal that you want to shoot for with all of this stuff. So just a little something to think about. Obviously, I'm not opposed at all to a more painterly style. In fact, this image even ends up with a lot of loose brushwork and stuff going on. But I also took it to enough of a finish where, the face, even when you zoom in, is fairly well rendered. Whereas, obviously on the card, the face in this image is going to be astronomically small. And that's okay. I'm okay with that sort of difference there. It's simple enough and clear enough values that it's going to still read at that small scale, but it's also going to be interesting to look at when you do see it larger. And of course, if you're producing a piece for a portfolio to try to get some card art illustration, all of those portfolio pieces are going to be seen at a fairly large scale on a monitor. Whether it's on your ArtStation website, your DeviantArt, your own personal portfolio, it's going to be a pretty large image that the art director is going to see. And so you're going to want to be able to show off your painting skills. Even if maybe you wouldn't necessarily do the exact same thing for your card art, you're going to want to show that you can do this stuff, that you're going to want to take things to a really nice refined finish. Even if that finish happens to be more painterly. You want to make sure that it looks intentional and it doesn't just look like lazy or sloppy rendering. That's not really something you want to go for at any point, especially if you're trying to produce a portfolio of really, really professional work. So another thing I kind of want to mention that kind of relates to developing a portfolio for card art is that card art obviously has to serve a purpose of some sort. It has to tell something. It has to show a character, it has to show a place, an action, and sometimes all of these things at the same time. And you want to make sure that as you're developing a portfolio for card art, that it's clear that you could follow an art description and produce something. It's not just producing an image here. We're producing an image to a brief. And so that's a skill set that I think is good to practice even before you were to get your first job. It's important to be able to take an assignment and to develop an image from that. So for this one, I did write myself a description of the image I wanted to make, and then followed that description. I did thumbnails and sketches based on a description I had already written. And there's a reason I did that, is that I think it's a very good exercise for everyone to do, to train yourself to be able to adapt and to fit an image to a description, because that's a large part of being an artist for card games, is that you need to be able to follow the brief of the art director. And so I know some people will, say get their friends to help them out and write a brief. You can get your spouse or significant other to help you out with that, and they could give you a starting point at least. You can also go online, and a lot of people actually post some of the actual art descriptions they've had for some of their jobs, and you can go ahead and take that exact same description and go ahead and create your own portfolio piece. And obviously when you put it in your portfolio, you don't have to quote the art description you worked on or anything like that, and that's fine, but it at least gives you a starting point that will help to round out a nice portfolio for you. And it will also give you an idea of what it's like to work on these games, what it's like to have a set brief and to try to make an image to fit that. The other thing, obviously, is learning to work with feedback, to receive some feedback and to go with that, and to try to improve your image based on that. That's something that a lot of new freelance artists can struggle with, is trying to incorporate feedback into the work and trying to accept that. But that's just part of the working process as a freelancer, and one you're going to have to get used to. So if you have any artist friends that you really trust and you like, and they know you and they know your work, go ahead and show some of your work while it's in progress and try to get some feedback on it. Same goes for actually non-artists that you might know. Sometimes getting non-artist feedback on your work can be extremely useful, because they can spot things that a lot of people would just never notice. They can see a lot of practical things of, well, that's obviously not going to even fit through that doorway. Stuff like that an artist might not even notice because it's too normal, it's too practical. We're too focused on the aesthetic sides of things that sometimes we lose sight of the very practical, realistic things that we're trying to depict. So go ahead and try to get feedback and incorporate that into your process in some way. So as we're wrapping up here, I just want to reiterate once again some of the really important stuff about doing card art. Making sure you have extremely strong values, extremely clear shapes, clear silhouettes, clear action. Everything should be painfully, obviously clear. If something's not clear, you have to work to make it better. You have to make the values clear, you have to make the silhouettes and the drawing clear, whatever it is, it needs to be really obvious. And then of course reference. Always, always, always reference everything in your image. Get really good reference. You don't have to copy the reference exactly, that's not what reference is about, but you need to be using it for your entire piece. Everything about it, every figure, go ahead and shoot reference. Find good reference online. Check out some of the resources we provide. There's a free sample pack we're including, and you can get some free reference. Go ahead and use those to create your own portfolio pieces, and they will be a great starting point for some of your own work. So those are sort of some of the high points that I really wanted to iterate in this video. And I hope it's helped you. I hope it's given you a clearer idea of how you can go about creating your own card art and make a portfolio so that you can also work on some games. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been a lot of fun, and thanks so much. And if you have any questions, go ahead and let me know. I'll do my best to answer as many of those as I can in the comments once this is up on YouTube. You're also welcome to hit me up on Twitter or email, and I'll do my best to get back to you. So thanks so much. Good luck with your work, and let's get to work.